Hey, I think we should get started now, Vinay. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Jagdish Upadhyay, Head of Marketing here at Balbix. Very excited to have you join us for the product demo. Um, if you have ever looked at high risk scores and wondered why, then you are in the right place. Today, we have Vinay Sridhara, our CTO and Head of Engineering, to unpack and provide you the understanding and the logic that drives the risk score. If you have any questions during this presentation, please put them in the Q&A panel and we will take them towards the end. Vinay, over to you.
Thank you, Jagdish. Good morning, everyone. Nice morning, and we will talk a little bit about the Balbix platform, the and how we have actually laced in, how we have put explainability into like every single thing that is actually done over here, so that when we are making decisions, we are confidently making those decisions. But let's take a small step back and then understand like what does explainability really mean? Explainability at its core is just about understanding why something happened. It's about being able to see the reasoning behind a decision, like what data, what context, and what logic led to this particular outcome, right? Now, moving into the systems, this means we don't want a black box. You should be able to trace the path from input to the results and understand like what were the contributing factors that resulted in this particular outcome. And now in cybersecurity, this is even more critical. You just don't want to know that something is risky or something has been downgraded. We want to know why. Or just as important, like we want to understand like why a high severity vulnerability was downgraded once we understand the context. Why a low severity vulnerability was upgraded, right? So firewall information, EDR information, the impact information, the contextualization of like what are all the various elements that it's actually interacting with, what is the threat behind that? These are all the important things, and they should all be laid out in a clean manner and then ultimately put together to give us a confident and an actionable answer that is explainable. And that's exactly what Balbix does. It makes the why behind every score and every decision visible. That way, we can explain it, defend it, and act in confidence. That's the goal. And that's what we are going to be talking about today through the demo. I'm going to do a live demo here, and I'm going to bring it up in a second. Um, Jagdish, let me know you're able to see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay. So this is as soon as you get into Balbix, this is the view that you're going to see. I want to understand what is the total number of assets that I was able to bring in, right? How many of them were categorized? What does the overall cyber risk really means? And is the system health good? What are the various data sources that actually brought in the data? There were 26,000 raw assets that were brought in, which were contextualized, deduplicated, and correlated. And then it resulted in 9.5K assets, for which most of them had enough information for us to do the right kind of categorization. Additionally, we also brought in around 170 apps, 1.5K users, and overall 7 million exposures. 7 million exposures means these were the CVEs, these are the non-CVEs, control failures, misconfigurations, the security advisories, all of them put together. Roughly 7.2 million vulnerability instances were deduplicated to get 7 million vulnerability instances or exposures as what we call. And after going through the contextualization and the overall risk scoring, the criticals and highs are roughly 0.1%, 0.2% over here, which is what needs to be acted upon, right? So now, this is a high-level view, 10,000 feet view. Where did this all come from? I'm going to walk you through a series of dashboards and a series of widgets, and then provide insights into like what these widgets, what these dashboards really mean, and how can we make sense of all of these things. So first thing is data quality, right? Like we bring in data, and here essentially we have actually brought in data from like 15 different data sources. It's the asset inventory, it's the vulnerability scanners, it's the IoT and OT information, cloud security infrastructure, application security across the board. And we have to combine all of that information together. And we need to have a very quick view of like how many entities each one of these data sources have been able to bring in, right? And then now across the board, I want to know with all the data that has actually been put together, what is the confidence that I have? Here, it's very clear, and we have to know like whether the confidence is actually going up or confidence is actually going down, which means that have we lost visibility into some data source? Do we have visibility from all data sources? These are all the questions that we should be able to answer, and we should be able to look at this from like a trend standpoint and not really from a snapshot perspective, right? Snapshot is more, I mean, the one thing is that snapshot is more emotional in nature, but the trends are actually factual in nature. They are statistics. Are we improving? Are we not improving? And here you can actually see that overall, more than 90% of them, we have good data sources or good telemetry, is how I would like to put it. And some of them are actually partial. And we would be able to drill down into the details of like what are those 1.3K assets that require more uh, data. We need to bolster that and uh, go into specific data sources for that. And then last but not the least, the other very important thing is that from an overall enterprise standpoint, I want to understand all of the data sources that we are actually bringing in over here. What is expected of these data sources and what is coming from those particular data sources? This is an easy heat map that we can visualize and say that from the burp speed standpoint, app inventory and app findings are the expected data or expected telemetry, and green means that we are actually getting that. From Aqua security standpoint, we are expecting the asset inventory in the form of like the containers and the CSPM data and the vulnerabilities associated with that. Something is going on over here and we are not really getting that. That actually clearly flags that we need to take a look at this particular data source. I have said quite a bit over the last 2 minutes, and now keeping all of these things 10,000 assets, 200,000 software instances, 7 million vulnerability instances, threats associated with that, impact associated with these assets. How do I actually put all of that together? And if I had to actually succinctly put this together in a 30-second or like a minute narrative, what do I do? And this is where Balbix AI automatically builds in the explainability into every single dashboard that you can configure. Here, I'm going to go ahead and say like, okay, analyze this dashboard and generate an insight for me. Let's give it like a second over here. And it starts putting the narrative. What is my current state? What are the key findings associated with that? And what are the action areas that I need to be looking into? And this becomes critically important when we are looking at such large volumes of data. I should be able to go and inspect every single piece of it, but at the same time, I should have the ability to get the insights at a very high level where I can easily disseminate this information and generate actionability. Now we have talked a little bit about the data quality, right? I am going to go ahead and say like, okay, what does this data quality really mean in terms of like me making the right kind of decision as an enterprise, as a CISO, as a vulnerability management or a CTEM director, as an IT person, I want to understand like, what is it that I need to do? Here is where the confidence information, the confidence and the telemetry of all the assets, applications all come together. Here, what we are showing here is the histogram of the assets, histogram of the applications, and the details behind each one of them. Remember, higher the score from the telemetry standpoint, it's essentially a confidence metric, the better it is. 100 is great, 0 is bad. So visually, we should be able to take a look at this and say like all my histograms are actually clumped to the right-hand side, and this is perfect, which means that I am getting the right kind of data. I have right visibility into all of my assets so that I can make informed and confident decisions. That's what really this means. Now, what are these 4K assets? What do they mean? I'm not missing any vulnerability information over here. I'm not missing any EDR information over here, control information over here. And this also gives me a high level overview of like, what is this composed of? It's composed of mainly end user computing, IoT assets, servers, and some networking assets. I should be able to take a look at this and say like, okay, I can confidently make decisions about these 4K assets. And so can I confidently make decisions about these additional 4K assets, which is roughly like 8K assets are actually in a very reasonable state for me, right? There are some EDRs that are missing, and we can click through and understand as to like what those are. Like 0.04% of the assets are actually missing EDR. What is that particular gap? Now, as we move more towards the left-hand side, it starts becoming, it starts revealing as to like where are certain areas in terms of like data quality that we need to go ahead and fix them, right? Here, 90% of the assets are missing EDR. Vulnerability information is there, but 90% of them are missing EDR, which means that we are either missing the EDR deployment or a control deployment, or we don't have visibility into it, which means to say that even though I have the vulnerability information, I'm missing that control information, which is probably making me do more work than what I am supposed to do, right? Because I have invested in the mitigating controls, but I'm not really taking advantage of those from the overall prioritization standpoint. That is a revealing factor over here. And 100% of the assets are actually missing EDR over here. I can go click on them and then see like what are these 14 assets. And then I can go ahead and say that, okay, I'm going to go create an automation. I'm going to export it, or I'm going to ticket it to the right set of people so that we can get the EDR deployment going. What we saw here is essentially data to insights to explainability to actionability. All of these things have to be like seamless within like a few clicks from a UI standpoint. We have a lot of things to do. And now I want to further break this down, and I'm going to say like, okay, where is the missing information actually coming from? My server telemetry seems okay. Yes, some of them are actually 10% of the servers are missing EDR information over here, right? But mostly 70 to 80, which is in a very reasonable shape. From an end user computing standpoint, there is some tail over here, 14 to 100% missing, 100% missing. And from here, it actually gets better. And what are all the other assets over here? Uh, Servers, end user computing, my cloud infrastructure. Again, Balbix has the context of like where what control needs to be present. And EDR is expected to be present on an end user compute asset, a server infrastructure, but other controls such as like firewalls and segmentation and all of these things are expected to be present for all other kinds of assets or every asset pretty much, right? And I should be able to go take a look at this. Now let's take a look at the telemetry from the application standpoint. Very similar to the infrastructure that we actually talked about, but a bit more over here, right? Same thing, all applications, what does my overall histogram actually look like? This is not really looking that great. I would have wanted as as a cybersecurity executive, as a cybersecurity professional, as a cybersecurity person who is operating on these things and remediating these things, I would have expected this over here, but visibility is key. So what are these particular applications that is missing? MFA, SaaS, DAST, SCA, controls, infrastructure. Is this app even applicable in my environment? Or are we just getting these as like shell applications from ServiceNow because we have not really cleaned up ServiceNow? These are the questions that will actually come up, and it will make us more diligent about how do we manage the data. And here, gives me a very clear idea. Subscription Manager is one of the applications. I'm getting the data from Veracode SAST, DAST, Checkmark SAST, and Veracode SCA, right? These are the various sources. There are infrastructure elements that are associated with that. I'm missing controls. That's one of the main reasons why my telemetry is actually low, and is the owner mapped. So that's a little bit about data, and data is actually the foundational element. Contextualized, correlated, deduplicated data is the foundation for us doing anything more. And that's why I wanted to spend around like 10 minutes talking about this. Now we'll get a bit more into the exposures and what does it mean from like an individual vulnerability instance standpoint and also from an asset standpoint. First, let's take a look at the assets. Exposure summary. I mean, like, yeah, these are my groups that I care about. How is my exposure actually working over here, right? And by domain, how are we doing from an asset standpoint? How are we doing from an application standpoint? Mean time to remediate is one of the key metrics that actually defines like how the teams are actually performing and how we are actually working towards the overall posture perspective. And what does it actually look like? Cloud infrastructure, 203 days of MTTR. Nothing really has actually changed in the last few days or week. Digital has increased. So this gives you a bird's eye view. And then again, we should be able to go ahead and dive deeper and say like, okay, for cloud assets, there are 1% of the assets that are critical and high that are exposed over here. How many of them are breaching SLA? What is the overall telemetry over here? The asset exposure, the application exposure. Is the coverage good? The app coverage is poor. Asset count is this much, and the overall app count is this much. Now, all of this information is actually packed and presented in a very clean, understandable manner so that this can be actioned upon in a seamless or in a manner that is actually seamless and confident is basically like what I am going to say. Now let's dive a little bit deeper, right? And then understand, let's break this up overall exposure into infra exposure, app exposure, the user exposures, the findings. We can get into the details of all of those. Infra exposure. What do we want over here? As I told you that from a telemetry standpoint, we want the histograms to actually be clumped on the right-hand side. From an exposure perspective, we want the histograms to be clumped on the left-hand side to have a better posture. Means that lower exposure is better, higher telemetry is better. In here, there are a bunch of stragglers which are actually pushing our overall exposure score to be higher from like an enterprise standpoint. 53 assets that are in the range of 80 to 90, and there are 37 assets that are in the range of like 90 to 100. When I can go click on them, and you're mostly going to see that these are the internet facing servers that are giving us this particular exposure score. This means that these have vulnerabilities, they have very little controls, that are exposed to the outside world. From a prioritization standpoint, these become critical for us to go ahead and address. From the perspective of like operationalization standpoint, work from right to left. Work from right to left, right? This will actually prioritize and help us reduce the exposure score in a very defensible, in a manner that is actually the right way to go about things. There are other things. How are we doing from an MTTR standpoint? What does our overall benchmark, I mean, how are we doing as compared to the benchmark perspective here? Actually, we are way off of the benchmark. What can we do to bring this down, right? And this is accompanied by like, okay, what are our SLA targets? Are our SLA targets right? Are our SLA targets actually off? Because we say that our SLAs, we are compliant by 80%, but then however, from an industry standpoint, our MTTR is actually not so great. What can I do about this? Maybe I need to actually think about my SLAs, right? At least from a critical and high standpoint. And what does my exposure backlog look like? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it staying stable? What can we do about that, right? These are all the various widgets that actually comes into play when we are looking at the exposures and the explainability from each one of these standpoint. Now, there are top 10 unique exposures that are actually keeping our overall score high. And this is giving us a view of like who are the specific owners. But let's actually go dive deeper into this and then get to the crux of this. So 2024 0012, there are 10 assets that are actually affected by this particular vulnerability, the score range is 98, right? And the mass of this particular exposure is actually fairly high. Now, EPS's score is high, EPS's percentile is high, CVS is actually saying high. Now, what am I going to do about this? Now, why? This is the Sankey that will actually give us a clear picture of like what are the various contributing factors that is making this particular exposure high. The role of these assets are high. They're all firewalls. The impact is actually high. The zone is external facing. Subzone is also external facing. These are the specific attack vectors. The loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, if this were to be compromised, is actually fairly high. The threat tags are actually keeping it very high. What I mean by threat tags, we'll get into that detail in a little bit. It's a CISA-Kev. Is it a ransomware? Is it a malware linked? What is the overall threat chatter actually looking like? Threat chatter means, I mean, like, what is the dark web activity? What is the InfoSec articles activity? What is the pastebin activity? What is social media activity along these things? And the EPS score, like what we discussed. And ultimately, we don't have any controls that are actually protecting all of these things, which will essentially increase the impact of exploitation high. The accessibility of this vulnerability is high from an adversary standpoint. Threat is critical. Mitigation efficacy is zero, which is what makes the overall exposure really high. I said again a lot of different things. Now, if I have to summarize all of these things and ask a question, can you please give me like a 15-second narrative for this? Give me an explanation for like what exactly is happening. I'm going to read this out, not completely, but certain key parts. Is high at 98. The kind of vulnerability that we are looking at, authentication bypass vulnerability affecting the internet-facing Palo Alto firewalls, right? Creating a dangerous attack surface where unauthenticated attackers can gain administrative privileges. Good telemetry quality provides high confidence. So we are highly confident about like what we are doing over here. And all systems require immediate patching using the available vendor fixes. 5 unique patch versions are available over here. And these are all cleanly laid out to say that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and ticket this, right? And now I can go back and say like, where did you get the threat from? What does it actually look like? CISA-Kev status, exploit status, ransomware link. What are the various ransomwares that are actually associated with this? RA World, right? I can go click on this and then get details about each one of them. And what are the various intelligence sources that are actually giving me this particular data, right? I want to be able to go ahead and say like, okay, what does this mean from like a social media hit standpoint? What does this mean from like a tech reports hit standpoint, right? What does it mean from like a forum hit standpoint? I should be able to go ahead and inspect, but at the end of the day, come back to saying like, this is the reason. This is the explainability behind this score of 98 and have the fixes be available for me at my fingertips so that I can easily say like, okay, go ahead and create a ticket out of this. Now, we have talked about the overall exposure score and the explainability behind each one of them. Similarly, I mean, like from an app exposure standpoint, we have split up the overall enterprise exposure into infrastructure exposure and the app exposure, right? And this is exactly what it looks like. What are my app findings? How many of them are DAST? How many of them are SAST? If you see SAST, DAST related ones, quite a few of them are actually deprioritized. SAST related ones, there quite a few of them are still in the critical and high range. So perhaps it's time for us to go ahead and see and take a look at like what our development practices are and is there something that we can actually do to make our overall CI/CD pipeline better, right? These are some of the questions that we can ask. And how does this look like from an application standpoint? How does this look like from my individual business unit standpoint, from like individual owner standpoint, and what is my overall status? How many of them are critical, medium, critical and high that need immediate attention? Roughly 20% of them are critical and high over here from an application standpoint. Again, going back, this tells me that we are doing fairly well from an infrastructure standpoint. We need to do something about our application infrastructure standpoint, application vulnerability. application finding standpoint. There are a lot more. Again, I'm going to come back here and say, like, okay, give me a narrative. This system is actually going to provide you a narrative for exactly how this is, right? There is a lot more that we can actually talk about in the coming set of series of things. We are going to deep dive into each one of them. Like, for example, what does the workflows look like? What does the workbench look like? And one particular thing I'm very excited about is the overall application view, how an application is actually composed. I mean, application provides services to the internal users or to the external users. They run on a specific set of infrastructure. There are controls associated with it. How do you put this all together? These are a series of things that we are actually going to be talking about, and I'm pretty excited to actually bring this all to you.
Thank you, Vinay, for such a wonderful presentation, unpacking why and how behind everything. And I think we are almost at the time now. So, like we'll send the recording of this presentation to everyone. There are a few questions. We'll tackle them. We'll send you the responses directly. And if you wish to see this platform in action, please go to our website, balbix.com/demo, and then you can request a demo. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the next session.
Thank you all.